In this video, we're going to create the color theme application from tutorial 4-5 in your textbook. You will have to create the form for this application. This one has not been created for you. And in your textbook, you'll see this figure that shows what the form is supposed to look like. You can see that we have a group box named color group box, and then inside of that group box we have 4 radio buttons. The radio buttons list the names of colors. We have yellow, red, and white, and then we have a 4th radio button that says back to normal. So when the user runs this application, you'll be able to you'll be able to click one of these radio buttons and it will change the background color of the form to the selected color. It's important to point out that the radio buttons are inside of this group box because normally when we use radio buttons, we put them inside of some sort of container, such as a group box, and that forces them to be mutually exclusive, which means that we can only have one of the radio buttons selected at a time. So let's switch over to Visual Studio and let's create this form. So first we'll create the group box, and then we will create the radio buttons inside of the group box. In the toolbox, you'll find the group box control under the containers section. So you'll just open up containers, and then there's the group box control. So I'll double click that, and that creates it on my form. Now you'll notice that the group box has this little box with the 4-headed arrow. That is how you move the group box around on the form. You just position your mouse cursor over that and you click and drag, and you can move it to the location that you desire. So I'll just leave the group box there. I'll enlarge it slightly this way, and I'll change the form size, and I'll go ahead and change the text that is displayed on the border of the group box, and that's with the text property, and the text is going to be select a background color. And next we'll change the name of the group box. According to the textbook, the name is supposed to be color group box. Okay, so now that I've created the group box, I can create the radio buttons inside of the group box. Now, at this point, we want to make sure that the group box is selected when we create the radio buttons. If the group box is selected at the time we create a radio button, then the radio button will be created inside of the group box. So I'll scroll back up to the Common Control section, and I'll find the radio button control. Right there it is, and I'll double click that, and you can see that the radio button is created inside the group box. Now this first radio button is for the color yellow, so the name of this radio button is yellow radio button, and the text property should read yellow. So we'll scroll down and we'll change the text property to read yellow. And one other property that I'm going to check just to make sure that it's set properly is the checked property. It's set to false, which is the default value. The checked property indicates whether the radio button is selected or not, and if it's set to false, that means it's not selected. And in the textbook, you might recall that the yellow radio button, the red radio button, and the white radio button should all have the checked property set to false, and the normal radio button will be selected and its checked property will be set to true. So we'll just double check that on each of the radio buttons. Okay, well let's go ahead and create the next radio button, the red radio button. Once again, I'll make sure that the group box is selected. I'll go to the toolbox and I'll double click the radio button control. I'll position it there. This is the red radio button, so we'll change the text property to read red. We'll change the name property, red radio button. And as I mentioned before, I'll just double check the status of the checked property, make sure that's set to false, and it is. Okay, so here's the form with all of the radio buttons created. You'll notice that the normal radio button, it appears selected, and that is because I changed the checked property to true. And I've also created the exit button control. Now, step 3 in the tutorial has you writing code for the event handlers that will execute when the user clicks one of these radio buttons. When the user clicks a radio button, a check changed event occurs. And when that event occurs, we want to check the status of the radio button that was clicked to determine whether it is checked or unchecked. And then based on that, we will set the background color of the form. For example, when the user clicks the yellow radio button, we'll check the status of the yellow radio button, and if it is checked or selected, then we will change the background color of the form to yellow, and we will follow that same routine with all of the other radio buttons. So let's go ahead and start that. Let's create an event handler for the yellow radio button. I'll just double click it, and that opens the code editor, and you'll notice that I have an event handler for the yellow radio button, and it responds to the check changed event. So the code that I want to write here is going to be code that determines if the yellow radio button is checked. So let's just have an if statement. If yellow radio button dot checked, okay, if that is true, then we're going to change the back color of the form, and the code that we're going to write is this dot back color equal, and then the setting is color dot yellow. Okay, so that will change the form to yellow if the yellow radio button is checked. And that's all the code for the yellow radio button. Basically, we're going to write similar code for each of the other radio buttons. Let's go back to the form and double click the red radio button. Okay, so now we have an event handler for the red radio button for its check changed event. So basically, if the red radio button is checked, we're going to change the form's back color property to color dot red. Okay, so you get the idea here. We'll create an event handler for the white radio button. If white radio button dot checked, and we will change the back color property of the form to color dot white. And the last one is the normal radio button. So if the normal radio button is checked, in that case, the color that we're going to set the form to is system colors dot control. That's the default color, the default background color of forms. Okay, so now we can go back to the form and we can write the code for the exit button. It's simply going to close the form, this dot close. Okay, so now let's compile and execute the program. Okay, so I'm going to click the yellow radio button, and you'll notice that it changes the form to yellow. Click the red, changes to red. I'll click white, changes to white, and then back to normal.